Hey guys, it's Amy here, and today I'm going to be doing one of my most requested videos. It's going to be a bookshelf tour of the books up above my head, not the smaller bookshelves, but the ones that are up here, which you may have seen pictures of on Instagram if you follow me there. So here we are on the other side of the camera. Please excuse the mess on the floor, but this is where I film. Here is the seat that I sit on and the two shelves on either side of me, and then moving up we have my main bookshelf. As I go along, I will try and remember to let you know if I've read the book or not, and then if I haven't, please let me know which books you think I should definitely pick up soon. I think I'm going to start from the top left-hand corner, so I shall meet you there. Here we are in the top left-hand corner, and from the top we have a copy of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. We also have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. It's just a kind of leather-bound copy. We also have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. So starting from the left here, we have this gorgeous copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a Folio Society edition, beautiful cloth bound in a slipcase. Moving along, we have a Folio Society edition of The Secret Garden. Equally beautiful, really lovely slipcase as well. Moving along, we have a bind-up of the Bronte sisters novels, Wuthering Heights, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall and Jane Eyre. Haven't read any of those, but I do want to read Wuthering Heights very soon. Next we have a similar edition, but for Thomas Hardy, and it has The Tess of the D'Urbervilles, The Mayor of Casterbridge and Far from the Madding Crowd. I haven't read any of those, but I am intending to read Far from the Madding Crowd soon. Moving along to these two here, it's just another copy of Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. I'm not going to get them out because they're just really boring green versions like that. Moving along, we have The Penguin Complete Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This includes all of his short stories and novels as well. I have read some of them, but not all of them. Next we have the Conan Doyle stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I haven't read anything from this book. Next we have a bind-up of the Jane Austen novels. All 7 are in this book. I have read Pride and Prejudice and got about 100 pages into Sense and Sensibility, and I haven't continued on with Sense and Sensibility. Next we have my Folio Society edition of the Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot stories. I did show these in another video, so I will just quickly show them now. They have these beautiful illustrations on the front of Poirot. I think Poirot is the best Agatha Christie character. I absolutely adore him. Moving on, we have a massive edition of The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. I really enjoyed that book. I have read it. Next we have Sand by Hugh Howey. I really love this cover and I have read this book. Next we have The Diviners by Libba Bray. I haven't read this one yet, but I do keep meaning to. It's just sat so high up on my shelf we never get to it. We have The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. I really enjoyed this book. I read it when I was like 14 and really loved it. Next we have The Host by Stephanie Meyer. I really love this book. I love this more than Twilight. I thought this book was fantastic and I was really disappointed with the film. I thought they did a really bad job. And then we have More Than This by Patrick Ness, which I haven't read yet. Moving along, we have a collection of Dickens Christmas stories. I absolutely adore this cover, although I haven't read any of the books in it because it got past Christmas by the time I wanted to read it, so I'll probably save it for this Christmas. Then have The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. I haven't read this one. The Age of Miracles by Karen Thompson Walker. Haven't read this one either. Choker by Elizabeth Woods. I think I have a review of this one somewhere on my channel. The Shadow of the Wind by Cosroe Zephon. I read this one a couple of years ago and really enjoyed it. It was in my favourites for the year. I thought this book was fantastic and I definitely want to read it again soon. The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. I haven't read this one. Ariel by Garth Nix. I read this one recently and it was in a wrap-up. I really enjoyed it. The Other Hand by Chris Cleave. I haven't read this one, although I got it such a long time ago. I think it was in one of my first ever book hauls on this channel. I just haven't got around to reading it. By the way, you may notice that this shelf on the top has absolutely no order. That's very true, there is no order. It's just because these books are too tall to fit on any of the shelves below. Moving on, we have It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. I really enjoyed this one. I read it earlier in the year. We have The Travels by Marco Polo. I was given this one at the Penguins Classic Dinner that I went to in London. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. I actually really enjoyed this book and the second one, and I'm really looking forward to the third one coming out. Next we have My True Love Gave to Me by various different authors, edited by Stephanie Perkins. I read it at Christmas. I think I really enjoyed it. I can't really remember it, to be honest. Next we have I Am the Messenger by Marcus Zusak. I did really enjoy this book. Not as much as The Book Thief though. On the top here we have The Complete Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. 7 books in the collection, including The Magician's Nephew, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, The Horse and His Boy, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair and The Last Battle. I haven't read any of those. Next we have The Lightning Thief, The Sea of Monsters, The Titan's Curse, The Battle of the Labyrinth, and finally The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan. I really love this series and I think these editions are absolutely gorgeous. I wish the next set of books in this series were in the similar editions to this because I think they look amazing. Moving along, we have Uglies, Pretties, Specials, and Extras by Scott Westerfeld. I have read Uglies and Pretties but haven't read Specials and Extras. Taken from the top there, I have Alice Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. This is a beautiful Barnes & Noble leather-bound edition, and this is another collection of books by Lewis Carroll, Alice Adventures in Wonderland. Sylvie and Bruno conclude The Hunting of the Snark and Other Verses, A Tangled Tale, Other Stories, Miscellaneous Writings and Logical Puzzles. This is all by Lewis Carroll in this cute little vintagey looking box set. Finally, we have the children's and J.K. Rowling corner of my bookshelves. Here we have all of the Harry Potter books. I'm not going to show you each one because you know what they look like. We have The Casual Vacancy, we have The Tales of Beedle the Bard, and the first 3 editions of Harry Potter that I got in paperback before I got these hardback editions here. We also then have the Quidditch Through the Ages and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Next we have Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. This is a really sentimental story to me. My parents bought it for me recently because they know I was struggling and that I needed something like this, and they knew that I had given away my copy, so they bought it for me in this really lovely edition, so I'm really happy about that. I'm not going to move any of these ones out. As you can see, they're in a very precarious position. They'll probably crush me to death if I try to. We have on the bottom here the Winnie the Pooh Complete Collection by A.A. Milne, the Doctor Who Storybook, The Wind in the Willows, Beatrix Potter Complete Tales, Children's Treasury of Spike Milligan, Four Tales by Philip Pullman, and these 5 on the top here are the complete collection of the Wizard of Oz series by L. Frank Baum, I think. So there we go, the top shelf is complete. Moving on to the next shelf, and this is when things start trying to have an order, although these 5 books here on the end aren't part of that order because I just didn't know where to put John Green. So on the end here we have An Abundance of Catherine, Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska, Paper Towns, and finally Will Grayson by John Green and David Leatherton. I've read all of those books and probably reviewed them on Goodreads, so if you follow me there or if you want to be my friend, feel free to go and do so. Then we move on to the actual shelf, and this is when my somewhat organisation of the shelf comes in. At this end we have Dystopia. So here we are, we have Gone, Hunger, Lies, Plague, Fear and Light by Michael Grant. You probably don't need to see the covers of them, they're all very much the same. Moving on, we have Noughts and Crosses, Knife Edge, Checkmate and Double Cross by Mallory Brackwin. They're all part of the same dystopian series. I really enjoy these books, I have read all of them. The next section here we have The Hunger Games, Catching Fire and Mockingjay, all by Suzanne Collins. I have read all of these. Moving on, we have the Maze Runner trilogy by James Dashner. They include The Maze Runner, Scorch Trials and Death Cure. Next we have Daughter of Smoke and Bone and Days of Blood and Starlight by Laini Taylor. I haven't read either of these. We then have Angel Fall and World After by Susan E. I haven't read these either. Next we have Cinder and Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is part of the Lunar Chronicles. I have read Cinder. I thought it was okay. I haven't got onto Scarlet yet. Next we have The Madman's Daughter by Megan Shepherd. I really enjoyed this one and I think the second 2 in the trilogy are out. I just haven't got round to buying them. We have The Winner's Curse by Marie Rutowski. I have read this one and the second one and I can't wait for the third one to come out. We then have the Divergent trilogy by Veronica Roth, Divergent, Insurgent and Allegiant. Moving on, we have the Under the Never Sky trilogy by Veronica Rossi. I don't even know if that's what this trilogy is called, but I've read them all and really enjoyed them. First one, Under the Never Sky, Through the Other Night and Into the Still Blue. We then have the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness. They look like this. The first one is The Knife of Nether Letting Go. The second is The Ask and the Answer, and the final is Monsters of Men. I read these earlier this year and really enjoyed them. For this section we have Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy, The Final Empire, The Well of Ascension and The Hero of Ages. The Well of Ascension I'm reading currently, so it's not here. These books kind of look like that. They're very pretty. Okay, so we've kind of moved on to my fantasy section of this bookshelf, and here we have the Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, the first one being Aragon. We then have Eldest, Springslinger and Inheritance to complete that series. Next we have the Old Kingdoms trilogy, Sabriel, Lyriel and Abhorsen by Garth Nix. They all have similar covers that look like this. We have the Millennium trilogy by Stieg Larsson, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest. I haven't read any of those. I also haven't read any of these or these. I have read Aragon. To be honest, I'm not really sure what this trilogy is doing in my fantasy section of the shelf, but I just didn't have anywhere else to put them. Next we have the Philip Pullman section of my shelf, which has the Northern Lights, the Subtle Knife and the Amber Spyglass. We also have The Ruby in the Smoke, The Shadow in the North, The Tin Princess and The Tiger in the Well. I haven't read any of these four, but I have however read his Dark Materials and they're one of my all-time favourite trilogies. These ones all look similar to this and they're all very pretty. Behind here we have Lyra's Oxford, also by Philip Pullman, and Once Upon a Time in the North by Philip Pullman. And on the end here we have the Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer, Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse and Breaking Dawn. They had to be on my shelf somewhere because I do really appreciate the effect they had in my life. I loved them when I was like 14. And on the end there we have a Q&A a day for a 5-year book, but I haven't actually written in it at all for a very, very long time. Moving down a shelf we have my classics collection, although Reasons to Stay Alive here on the end by Matt Haig is obviously not part of my classics collection. It's just the only place I could find to put it on my shelf. Off the top here we have my passport and a little notebook with Pride and Prejudice on the front. We then have Henry Miller's The World of Sex, Slip Under the Microscope by H.G. Wells, Come Close by Sappho, The Fall of Icarus by Ovid, Circe and the Cyclops by Homer, How Much Land Does a Man Need by Leo Tolstoy, The Life of a Stupid Man, The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell, Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen, How a Ghastly Story Was Brought to Light by a Common or Garden Butcher's Dog by Johann Peter Hebel. We then have the Penguin's Classics Catalogue, Sparkling Cyanide by Agatha Christie, Murder on the Orient Express, Hercule Poirot's Christmas, The Adventures of the Christmas Pudding, and Peril at End House by Agatha Christie. Moving on we have Oleanna, a play by David Mamet, The Whitsun Weddings, a poetry collection by Philip Larkin, Selected Poems by Edwin Muir, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, a very, very old battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, another play, The Revenger's Tragedy. Go back, I haven't read any of these Penguin Black classics. I have read most of these Agatha Christie's and most of these poetry collections and things because I studied them during A-levels and things like that. Next we have Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I don't know if I've read this one. I think I have, I just can't really remember it. North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I haven't read this one. Another edition of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I read this during my A-levels and from what I can remember I didn't really enjoy it. I Capture the Castle by Jodie Smith. I really enjoyed this book. I read it earlier in the year. Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. I have read this one and really enjoyed it. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Really enjoyed this one as well. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I chose to study this one for my A-levels and really enjoyed it. The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I haven't read this one yet. 6 Memos for the Next Millennium by Italo Calvino. I also haven't read this one. Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I hauled this one recently so haven't read it yet. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I haven't read this one either. Reading Lolita in Tehran by Azar Nafisi. I actually want to read Lolita and the other books that are mentioned in this book before I read this one, so I will be reading this one soon, hopefully, once I've read the others. 1984 by George Orwell. Really love this book. Bonjour Tristesse by Francois Sagan. I haven't read this one. We then have The Madman of Bergerac, The Misty Harbour and the Grand Banks Cafe by Georgia Simenon. I haven't read any of these, but I think the covers are absolutely gorgeous and they have that really kind of like waxy, smooth feel to them. Finally, from my Penguin Modern Classics collection, I have A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Next we have my Penguin English Library collection of books. First we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I've read this one and love it. Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. As I mentioned before, I have read about 100 pages of this book but haven't continued on. I will eventually, I just need to push myself. Another copy of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which I still haven't read but I intend to very, very soon. Another edition of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I have obviously read this one. It's one of my all-time favourite children's stories. Then move on to my large collection of Charles Dickens novels, which I have not read any of yet, so I really need to get on it. First one being David Copperfield. Next we have A Tale of Two Cities. We then have Great Expectations, Little Dorrit, and finally Oliver Twist. If you have a recommendation of where I should start with those Charles Dickens books, then please let me know down below. Next we have another edition of Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy, which I do want to read very soon. We have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Love this book, think it's great. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Haven't read this one but maybe want to read it next month around Halloween. And finally, with the Penguin English Library collection, we have Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. Moving down, we have the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin, A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, 2 parts of it. I'm reading the first one at the moment. A Feast of Crows, A Dance of Dragons, 2 parts of that. All of those have similar covers to this one. We then have this random pile of sideways books, which I'm not going to pull out. On the bottom there, Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, Heap House by Edward Carey, and Falsham by Edward Carey. I've read Good Omens and Heap House, really enjoyed both of them. Looking forward to continuing on with the Ironmonger trilogy by Edward Carey with Falsham. At the end of the shelf we have Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich, Whispers Underground and Moon Over Soho, also by Ben Aronovich. We then have Anna and the French Kiss, Lola and the Boy Next Door, and Isla and the Happy Ever After by Stephanie Perkins. They all look kind of like that. And finally, at the end of this shelf we have The Magician's Guild, The Novice and The High Lord by Trudy Canavan. Haven't read any of those. On to the final shelf we have Battle Royale by Koshin Takami. I haven't read this one. Winger by Andrew Smith. I have read this one. Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. This is a personalised edition that Penguin sent me. The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. This is a fantastic book. Choke by Chuck Palahniuk. I don't recall if I've read this one or not, but I have read some of his other work. Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I have read this one. Invisible Monsters by Chuck Palahniuk. I definitely haven't read this one. Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. Really enjoyed this one. Mr. Palomar by Italo Calvino. I think I only got about halfway through this one before stopping. Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I have read this one. Absolutely loved it. Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. I think I read this one earlier in the year and really loved it. So Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Really enjoyed this book as well. Birdie by Jess Vance. I read this one in the last few months and really enjoyed it. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I did a review of this one. I absolutely adored this book. I think it's going to be in my favourites for the year. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Enjoyed this one as well. Thought it was a really good book. The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. I've never read this one, although I've had it on my shelf for a really long time. Another edition of The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak. Life of Pi by Jan Martel. I haven't read this one. I watched the film and really enjoyed it, but I haven't been tempted to pick up the book since. How to Be Bad by E. Lockhart, Laura Miracle and Sarah Milanowski. I read this one earlier in the year and probably did a review and a wrap-up somewhere. Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. I've read both of those too. The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud. I haven't read this one. And We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. I read this one earlier in the year, didn't really enjoy it that much. The Edge of Never by J.A. Redmersky. I've definitely done typed reviews on my blog of a lot of these books, so if you have any interest you can go onto my blog and find the book by title and then you will see the review there. Silver Linings Playbook by Matthew Quick. I really enjoyed this book, although I've never watched the film, which is what is on the cover, so I really should do that at some point. Dust by Hugh Howey. This is the third part of the Wool trilogy. I have got Wool and Shift, but they're at my boyfriend's house, so they're not on my shelves at the moment. Attachments by Rainbow Rowell. This is my favourite book by Rowell at the moment. Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I thought this book was okay. I didn't think it was amazing. Wait for You by Jay Lynn. I haven't read this one. Unspeakable by Abby Rushton. I recently hauled this one, so I haven't read it yet. Watcher in the Shadows by Carlos Ruiz Zefon. I read this one. I didn't think it was as good as The Shadow of the Wind though. Johnny and the Bomb by Terry Pratchett. Haven't read this one. You Are Liars by E. Lockhart. I really enjoyed this one, probably more than the How to Be Bad book that I also have by E. Lockhart. I also have Rule by Jay Cranover. I don't really remember where I got this from. I think it was possibly an unsolicited copy sent by the publisher. Then have Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Really enjoyed this book. Legend by Mary Lou. I started this trilogy but haven't read any of the other ones and I don't think I ever will. Tan Omnibus by Marcus Sedgwick. Really enjoyed the two novels that are in this book. A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. Absolutely love this book. Patrick Ness is an incredible writer. Everything by Nicola Yoon. I read this one. It was sent to me by the publishers and I thought it was fantastic. Completely unlike any other book I've read before. We then have Atonement by Ian McEwan and I've watched the film, thought it was okay, and I've never picked up the book. Would you suggest that I read this book? I can't really remember the film, to be honest. Then have Lullaby by Chuck Palahniuk. I have read this one. It was kind of creepy. I seem to remember it being really strange. We then have Being a Girl by Hayley Long. This was a really funny read. We then have Children of Men by P.D. James. This is the first book my boyfriend ever bought me and I really enjoyed it. And have The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold and I really enjoyed this book. I haven't read it in a really long time though. We have Wonder Boys by Michael Chabon. I haven't read this one. Shadowmancer and Wormwood by J.P. Taylor. Haven't read either of these. The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I really loved this book. Thought it was fantastic. The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. Haven't read this one. I'm not sure if I'm going to. I keep contemplating giving this book away because I'm not sure I'm really tempted by it anymore. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Haven't read this one, but apparently the film's really good. I haven't watched the film either. Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Really loved this book. The film was really creepy. Another edition of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This is the first edition that I got of this book. The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. Haven't read this one. Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I have read this one. Didn't really enjoy it that much. Let Me Go by Keizu Ishiguro. I have read this one. I can't really recall it that well. I haven't watched the film, but I'm really tempted to. We then have Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. I haven't read this one either. A Spot of Bother by Mark Haddon. Haven't read this one, although I'm really tempted to because I really enjoyed The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Book of the Fool by Nathan Filer. I read this one earlier in the year and absolutely adored it. The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Neffenegger. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was fantastic. I really want to watch the film. Icons by Margaret Stoll. Haven't read this one. The House at Riverton by Kate Morton. I haven't read anything from Kate Morton, but I've heard lots of good things about her. An Ember in the Ashes by Sabah Tahir, and I read this earlier in the year. I thought it was fantastic. I can't wait for the next one. Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James. I haven't read this one, but I'm really interested too because it's centred around the characters from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Haven't read this one either. Finally, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I have read this one. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was amazing. So there we go. That was all of the books on my bookshelf. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've taken the time to watch it, thank you very much. You probably wanted to grab a cup of tea or something beforehand. If I've ever done a review of any of these books, it will be on my blog or on Goodreads. Feel free to go and follow me there or be my friend. I would love it. When I was filming this, it did seem that I was saying that I hadn't read a lot of the books, but actually I've calculated that I have read over 65% of the books that I own. So I think that's pretty good, to be honest. And I've only got about 140 that I haven't read, which are mainly on those bottom shelves there. So there we are. So there you go, my bookshelf in all its glory. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's probably going to take me a really long time to edit, so I hope you appreciate it. As always, I will leave links to Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, everything I mentioned today down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and I will see you soon. Bye! I have no idea where to even begin with this book. It was a really difficult read, and I think it's going to be really difficult to review because I have really mixed thoughts on it.